Hey guys, Gavin here. We're out in White Sands, New Mexico, and it's really cool out here. If you've never been out here, it's one of the only places, the kids are down there sledding, you'll probably hear them hooting and hollering. One of the only places, the sand's so fine where you can sled in sand. And it's almost like sledding in snow. But this is a really neat place. A lot of people love to come out here and photograph because once you hike out a little bit, you know, right around here where people are playing, you see a lot of tracks and stuff. But you get on one of the trails and you start hiking out here into White Sands, and you just get these beautiful rolling dunes, the mountains here. Let me show you the mountains over here in the background. I'll just pan the camera around here, such as it is. Just a huge area of sand dunes. Now, what I want to talk about today is this is a great example, and we talk about it in my exposed workshop. We look at it in a little more depth as we're discussing zones and tone values and stuff. Exposure is really important, and so is contrast. A lot of times, what happens today with all this software and tools and HDR stuff is we think, well, let's take it and let's crunch everything into midtones. We want to be able to see everything. Here's the problem. When you see everything, you don't see anything. You need contrast, separation. We need to use the tonal range from dark to light, right? And if you look at the works of other masters like Ansel Adams and Ken Whitmire and things, you'll see this rich range of tones. The reason I wanted to show you White Sands and kind of make you think about it, and if you ever get a chance to get out here, it's an interesting study because what's happening, right? We have this huge white area. So the sun's over here, as you saw when I turned the camera around, the sun's over there, and I just metered this, and as I've discussed before in the workshops, it's deceiving because in this case, the sand is so white and reflecting so much light, the value between the highlit sand and the shadow sand is not near as much. In fact, the difference, and it's going to be hard to believe. If I were to ask you to guess, you probably wouldn't believe, but guess how many stops are between the shadow and the highlight, because it's showing up on the camera, right here, which is applying contrast and stuff, is quite a bit. But in fact, if you meter these highlights back here in the sand versus the shadows of the sand, it's a difference. I just metered the shadows and they were about 15.5, and I metered the highlights and they were about 16.75 to 17 in exposure value, that is. So we're only 1 to 1.5 stops different between the highlights and the shadows here. For real. I know it's hard to believe, but that's what we're dealing with. What I've found in a place like this is what's happening is essentially this entire area is a reflector. So it's a great opportunity for portraits. Now you can see there's still a ratio on my face, okay? But it's not as much as it would be as if this sand was dark brown or if I was in the dirt, because there's light reflecting everywhere around here. So it makes you think a few things, and that's just a couple points I wanted to make. First of all, you got to be aware of your surroundings. How reflective is the material around you? Knowing that, you can use that. We can use that to go out and say, well, I want to do a portrait, but there's too much shadow there. So you could look for a surface. You can look for a rock, a boulder, even the side of your truck to bounce light off of. We talked about just using single light sources in this month's photo kit over at seimeffects.com, as we used a ProPhoto B1 strobe, and we just kind of used the light, a single light source, to really get a beautiful result in portraits. The same can be done if you're using the environmental light that's around you. If you're out photographing White Sands, in particular, be aware of it. Because what you'll do is you'll come out here and you're like, oh, I'm going to go photograph the cool lines of sunset, right? Now, as this sun sets, the difference becomes even less between shadow and highlight. So you take an image of these rolling sand dunes at sunset, okay? And then you go back and you're like, wow, it's kind of flat. There's not much separation between the lines of the dunes, which of course is really what makes it beautiful. You're bringing in space, position, line, and tone to tell your story. So whether it's a portrait in the forest or whether you're out here in White Sands doing a beautiful landscape, you got to be aware of those challenges. And areas like this really fascinate me. They're really fun because they show us things that we don't expect. When you glance at this, it doesn't seem to your eye like it is to the sensor, to the meter. And once you get your head around that, once you realize that what you perceive at a glance is not always what's happening in the science of how light flows and goes, it gives you more understanding of how light works in different situations and what to do with it regardless of what you're photographing. So I'm gonna cut it short for now. I just wanted to show you guys that. I wanted to kind of show you White Sands out here, and let me just pop the camera off the tripod if I can, and we'll take a quick peek You know, you can see it's really cool out here. And it just goes on for a long, long ways. There's the sun, very bright back there. Kids are down there playing. But really cool stuff. Think about, let me flip the camera around. Think about the values of shadow to highlight and how they're not as much as you think, because in this case, there's light bouncing absolutely everywhere. If we watch the light and think about the light and observe how it goes, this is why I love metering. Even if you get a meter inside your phone, which is usually relatively accurate, it can help give you a picture of what's happening with light. And then when you go to make that great image, and you're on a time crunch and the sun's dropping behind the hill as the bride's walking across the dunes on the way to the first dance or whatever it is you're doing, you'll be in control of the light instead of it controlling you. Hey, you guys have a good night. I'm going to go play with my kids, all right? Take care.